So, what do you think about church? Do you maybe think it's not for you? Do you think it's full of judgmental hypocrites? Well, let's talk about that. If you love church, what do you feel about the world and those that aren't church people? How do you feel about those who disagree with your world view? That's what we talked about Sunday at Today Church. Have you ever wanted to ask questions after a Sunday sermon? Have you ever thought, well, how does this actually apply to my life? Well, that's what this Tuesday review is all about. And so for the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about and kind of summarizing the message from Sunday. It was the last part of our unseries, and the topic was hypocrites. So today we're going to look at the answer to these questions, see what Jesus actually said. And my hope for you today is that you discover that Jesus offers a better way than judgment and condemnation. I'm not talking about compromise or weakness or not having a standard, but what love really, really looks like. And so if you're watching this either live or if you're watching this later, if you'd like to ask any questions, that would be awesome to just mention it in chat. And if it's not live, I'll try to cover those later on. Also, if this is meaningful to you, it would really help if you like it or if you share it. Now, I try not to preach from the headlines because the world is constantly changing. Of course, God's word never changes. But over the past few weeks, there have been some issues where left and right voices have been very, very vocal. And one of those issues that we're not going to talk about, there was this back and forth on Twitter that I was watching. And I kind of did an unscientific experiment. I took the responses from both sides. So you have like Christians on this side, you have liberals and progressives on this side, so evangelicals against those who are not. Hey, Adam, good to see you checking in. And the thing was, I took several opposing posts and I swapped the names that they were calling each other and swapped some of the issues, and it sounded exactly the same. Aren't we supposed to be different? So we're going to be looking at these three questions. What is a hypocrite? Can you be right and still be wrong? And the third point today, when the world is broken, what really matters? And I hope that we'll be able to see that Jesus gave us some very clear information on both what a hypocrite is and how we can be better and be different. So first of all, what is a hypocrite? Well, what did Jesus have to say about hypocrites? Well, a whole lot. In fact, he went after hypocrites quite a bit. And we're going to read from Matthew 7 to look at some things that Jesus said about being a hypocrite. He said in verse 1 of Matthew 7, "Do not judge so that you will not be judged." Notice that's not about the other person. Don't judge, or do not judge, so that you will not be judged. It doesn't have anything to do about the right or wrong of somebody else. We are not to judge so that we won't be judged. For by the standard you judge, you will be judged. And the measure you use will be the measure you receive. And then Jesus says, why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but fail to see the beam of wood, this big 2x4, in your own? Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye while there is a beam in your own? And this is where he defines what a hypocrite is. Jesus says, you hypocrite, first remove the beam from your own eye. Then you can see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Now, most of the time we stop there when talking about judgment and hypocrisy. But Jesus went on in the same thought here and continues with something that seems a little bit unrelated. Verse 6, he says, do not give what is holy to dogs or throw your pearls before pigs. Otherwise, they will trample them what is holy under their feet and turn around and tear you to pieces. So with all that in mind, let's ask that question again. What is a hypocrite based on what Jesus says? Well, looking at the analogy of a speck or a small piece of wood compared to a beam or a 2x4 in your own eye, a hypocrite is someone so focused on the sins of others that they can't see their own sin. A hypocrite often feels better about themselves by putting someone else down. It's this need to be right to put someone else down. And of all of the sin issues, Jesus confronted hypocrisy the most. The Greek word for hypocrite means to put on a mask. It's pretending or being something on the outside that you're not really on the inside. Now, Jesus never called sinners names. He never demeaned those trapped in sin. But he went after those who considered themselves righteous and holy because they kept all of the right rules, and yet condemned everyone else. And he went pretty harshly after them. He called them vipers and snakes and whitewashed tombs, and was constantly butting up against their own traditions and proving them wrong. Who would Jesus call vipers, snakes, and whitewashed tombs today? Unfortunately, I think he might go after some of us. I'm putting myself in that same category. In the story of the woman caught in adultery in John 8, where Jesus was confronted by some of these Pharisees that he often called names and that he took to task for their hypocrisy. They brought this woman who had been caught in the very act of adultery. And according to the rules and law of that time, that was the death penalty. And stoning was the way that penalty was carried out. Now, the penalty was supposed to be for both parties. We don't know where the guy was, but they just brought the woman. And they asked Jesus what he should do. They were trying to trap him. They were trying to trick him. Jesus didn't respond. He in fact, knelt down and started writing on the ground. And then they just kept after him. And then Jesus looked up, and we're going to read from John 8, verse 7. It says, when they persisted in asking him, he stood up straight and replied, whoever among you is guiltless may be the first to throw a stone at her. Whoever is guiltless among you, throw the first stone. Some translations say he without sin cast the first stone. So who is the hypocrite? The one throwing stones at the guilty when we're guilty ourselves. But you might ask, how do we prove that they're wrong? Don't we need to stand up for the truth? I'm not going to compromise my faith. Love is never a compromise of faith. But are we actually doing something that is helpful, or are we just throwing stones? So let's go back to that dogs and pigs part of what Jesus said and try to understand that in the context here. Matthew 7, verse 5, Jesus, where he defines hypocrite, he says, you hypocrite, first remove the beam from your own eye, and then you can see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And then he says, do not give what is holy to dogs or throw your pearls before pigs. Otherwise, they will trample them under their feet and turn around and tear you to pieces. Well, what does this have to do with hypocrisy or judgment and the beam and the speck? Well, giving holy things to dogs, in the culture of Jesus' day, dogs would have been Gentiles or anyone who doesn't follow God. Pigs were an unclean animal that you couldn't eat or touch. It would defile you. And Jesus is saying, don't take what is holy and give it to those who can't even really understand it. Otherwise, they'll just fight you back. That's why we love our enemies. That's why we do good for them. Because we don't take what they can't understand and try to use it as some sort of weapon. Paul talked about this in 1 Corinthians 2:14. He said that the unbeliever does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them because they are spiritually discerned. You can't fight a spiritual battle with the right information because the unspiritual mind, the unbeliever, doesn't even receive the things of God. So as Jesus said, we'll go back to this real quick. Don't give what is holy to dogs or throw your pearls before pigs. The precious things of the righteousness of God, the unbeliever can't even receive those things. They can't understand them. You can never argue anyone into the kingdom. In Matthew 13, Jesus gave the parable and the explanation of the seeds and the sower. And the seed that fell on the footpath, on the sidewalk, it didn't take root because Jesus said of misunderstanding, that they didn't understand the good news, which is the seed. We can't argue anybody into the kingdom. We can't prove them wrong without first proving our love. And sometimes we need to put down our stones and look in the mirror and work on our own heart. That's how we can change the world. It's by love first. Now, does that mean that we compromise or that we don't stand up for truth? Absolutely not. But are we arguing with those who can't even understand what we're saying? And are we hypocrites ourselves? Which brings us to the next point. If we're going to change the world, we use the hashtag at Today Church, love first. If we're going to change the world, love first. The question is, can you be right and still be wrong? You know, we tend to give people a pass when we think they're on our side or we think they're on the right side. We excuse their actions if they agree with us. But it's not about the information or what you say you stand for. It's about the heart. And the real litmus test of whether we're right or wrong is, are we acting in love? And what does love look like? Well, we're told very clearly, 1 Corinthians 1-7, Paul says that if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but I do not have love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith so that I can remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. This is saying all the spiritual gifts, all of the knowledge, without love, it means absolutely nothing. And even if we're generous, verse 3, if I give away everything I own, and if I give over my body in order to boast, but do not have love, I receive no benefit. Without love, nothing matters. And here's what love looks like. Love is patient. Love is kind. It is not envious. Love doesn't brag. It's not puffed up. It's not rude. It's not self-serving. It's not easily angered or resentful. It is not glad about injustice, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love is patient. Love is kind. It's not envious. It doesn't brag. It's not puffed up. It's not rude. It's not self-serving. It's not easily angered or resentful. That is how we can tell if we're really right. Because you can have the right information. You can have the truth. But if you don't have love, it's meaningless. If you don't hold your political and spiritual heroes to these standards, well, you need some new heroes. I want to challenge you today to look beyond the information and begin to look at the heart, because without love, nothing matters. And many times the world sees us, who are supposed to be Jesus followers, and they know that we should be acting in love, and we're not. Can you imagine if the hospital staff did nothing but make fun of all of the sick people and post memes about how sick they were and make fun of them. Who in the world would want to go to that hospital? And sometimes we wonder why people think that church is not really the answer and just full of a bunch of hypocrites. Oh, but you don't understand. The other side is more wrong than us. But are you really worthy to throw that stone? In John 4, when Jesus interacted with the woman at the well, he didn't start by confronting her with her sin. It was only after he reached out to someone who society would not have reached out to, would not have even touched, would not have even had a conversation with as a Jewish rabbi. That was totally against the cultural norm. But he went out and he actually drank water that she had touched, which would have made him ceremonially unclean according to their tradition. But he didn't point fingers at her until she got thirsty for the living water, until he revealed who he was. He never confronted her sin. And many times we have the cart before the horse. We want to confront people with their sin before they have a confrontation with Jesus and before they have a hunger for living water. If we're not showing love first, then we can be right and have all the right information and still be wrong. So our final point today, when the world is broken, what really matters? We would probably all agree that the world is broken. But what do we do to make a real difference? Jesus gave us plenty of information about the world, what the world was going to be like at the end. And things are going to get worse. He said that we would have tribulation. He said that we would have difficulty, that we would have trouble. We would have persecution, that there would be wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes and pestilence. Here's what he said in Matthew 24, verse 10. Then many will be led into sin. And this is talking about the end times. And they will betray one another and hate one another. Verse 11, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many. Does that sound a little familiar today? Verse 12, and because lawlessness will increase so much, the love of many will grow cold. And I'm afraid that's where we are today. But the person who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole inhabited earth as a testimony to all the nations. And then the end will come. This gospel of the kingdom, this good news of the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world. And then the end will come. Did you know that there's over 3 billion people in the world today who have never even heard the good news of Jesus, that don't even know who he is? The good news isn't bad news. The good news isn't, hey, we're the good guys and you're the bad guys. The good news is Jesus, that he is the only answer, that he is the only way. And when we talk about hypocrites today, we're going to wrap up by looking at John 13, 34 through 35, where Jesus said, I give you a new commandment, talking to us, disciples, to love one another just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. Everyone will know by this that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. That's a very clear command. And we have no business trying to fix the world when we can't even love one another as the church. We're trying to get the specks out of everybody else's eyes, and we have this 2x4. Why would the world believe us when we don't obey some of the most simple things that Jesus commanded? Love one another. If the one another keeps changing, you aren't doing the love part right. It's really easy to point fingers at all the bad people, at all the people that hurt us. It's hard to look in the mirror and say, God, change me so I can love them. Paul wrote to the Corinthian church in 1 Corinthians 5, beginning in verse 9, he said, I wrote you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. In no way did I mean the immoral people of this world, or the greedy and swindlers and idolaters, since you would then have to go out of the world. He's not saying that we shouldn't associate with sinners. How in the world are we going to reach them? Now, Jesus never sinned with the sinners, but he ate with them. He associated with them. Verse 11, but now I'm writing to you not to associate with anyone who calls himself a Christian who is sexually immoral or greedy or an idolater or verbally abusive or a drunkard or a swindler. Do not even eat with such a person. And then Paul goes on to say in verse 12, for what do I have to do with judging those outside? Does it seem like we spend most of our time pointing fingers at those outside the church? He says, God will judge those outside. Remove the evil person from among you. I didn't read this on Sunday, but 1 Peter 4:17 says, for the time has come for judgment, and it must begin with God's household. And if judgment begins with us, what terrible fate awaits those who have never obeyed God's good news. Hypocrisy is when we're more concerned about everyone else than fixing our own house and our own hearts. So what is a hypocrite? Jesus clearly defined that. Someone who's trying to fix the mess of someone else without dealing with our own issues. Can you be right and still be wrong? Without love? Absolutely. And when the world is broken as it is, what really matters? What matters is how we love. Where is your love? Who are you accountable to that keeps you accountable to the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5? Do your heroes and those you look up to and those you tweet about or post about or that you share their memes, do those same heroes show the fruit of the Spirit? If you're a Jesus follower, I want to challenge you today to do better than hypocrisy. The world is watching. Are we really loving one another like Jesus commanded? And if you aren't a Jesus follower and think we're a bunch of hypocrites, I just want to challenge you. Give Jesus a chance. Those without love, those that are judgmental and condemning everyone, those aren't Jesus followers. There is a better way. Jesus showed us how to love one another. And he is the way, the truth, and the life. And that was the whole point of Sunday's message. I hope that you have enjoyed this Tuesday review. Thank you for watching and commenting. John, I appreciate you posting all those scriptures. I'll go through and look at those. If this is meaningful to you, it really helps if you like it, if you share it, if you comment. And also want to let you know that on Sunday we are starting a new series for the Easter season coming up. This series is it's called Cracked. Okay, it's a play on Easter eggs. Jesus changes everything. Are you anxious, stressed, or worried? Jesus can change all that. Don't miss Cracked. That's the April series at Today Church about overcoming anxiety. Easter is so much more than bunnies and colored eggs. Hope has risen for you. And once again, if you would like to watch the full sermon from Sunday, you can watch that at today.church. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have an amazing day.